Welcome back, my friends. I am so excited to get back into amazing conversations with other makers after our extravaganza of a month on all things photography back in June. These next few weeks are also going to be full of excitement outside of the podcast as I journey alongside 29 other makers who have joined my 6 weeks course, The Maker's Photography Styling System. And I get to watch how together we're going to be creating beautiful styled photos so much easier. Not to mention, just as important, faster. I'll be sharing students' aha moments over on our Instagram stories, so be sure to give us a follow at The Maker's Playbook if you want to see more of all of that. But back to today's conversation. Today, I'm sharing a chat with one of my very first potter friends, Angela Venarchik. Angela and I first met when I joined our shared community studio in Chicago, the Lincoln Square Pottery Studio and Learning Center. I was just remembering the addicting power of clay that I had tiptoed into years before, and for the first time was properly learning all the things. I'd watch in awe as Angela went into full production mode, whipping out dozens of bowls in the hour I was attempting to center. She would share throwing tips, and I shared business tips, because she was preparing to quit her full-time job and go all in on pottery. 3 years later, we're catching up on all things clay and business. So let's get to it.
Hey, Angela, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
I haven't seen you since you left our community studio.
I know, like almost 3 years ago.
So obviously, I just mentioned it. I know you from our community studio here in Chicago, and I'm excited to hear about all your next steps because in those 3 years, you've done a lot since then. But for people who haven't heard you, who aren't in Chicago with both of us, tell us how we got to talking, why you're taking the time to talk on a podcast with me.
Yeah, I have been a full-time potter in Chicago for actually it's been 3 years since March 2018. And I have been doing this like on and off. And I've been in clay since basically I was 15 years old. So going on 20 years now, and always knew that I was going to be doing this. And when I stumbled across you, I think you were at that phase at a really transitional time. You got to catch me like right before I jumped in full time. We had even talked because I admired you because you owned your own photography business and you had a lot of good input. And I remember us just chatting about what those steps were, what those first steps were going to look like for me as I quit my job and jumped in full time. And then I think I was at that studio for about 3 more months. And then I wouldn't say got kicked out, but definitely overstayed my welcome as a full-time potter. It's a hobby studio. I definitely was producing too much there. I needed my own space. I needed a kiln that could accommodate the workload that I needed to sustain a full-time job. Since then, I've been in it's not a community studio necessarily. It's a private studio with 10 other artists, not all of whom are potters. There's only 4 potters. There's a painter, there's a paper maker, there's a photographer who also owns like a publishing company. There's someone who does these amazingly like huge installations and 3D printing. So it's a really cool community. But this transition for me has been from the community studio has been really cool because I didn't need to buy a kiln still. So it was a nice little launching pad. I didn't need to invest in anything other than a wheel. I already had all the furniture, and it's enabled me to just like really pursue and focus on the building blocks of a brand new baby, business and grow it from there. And it's grown every year. It's been amazing. And I feel very lucky.
And now I wish I could have said I had the foresight to plan this conversation, but I just got lucky that you're in the next phase. Now you're preparing to move out of that studio even.
Yeah, so it's actually not a super far move. I think that the Instagram post made it seem like it was this big far away move, but it's literally just a significantly larger studio on the first floor of my current one. So I'm not like at that phase yet where I need to invest in a kiln. It's luckily I to use it. I will just have an opportunity to move. So currently I have space to only produce. I have a couple shelves, I have a work table, I have my wheel, and with the transition of turning over work, I don't have any extra shelf space for packaging and shipping or even storing like the mass amount of inventory that I usually accumulate for like big sales and stuff like that. So this new space is definitely going to accommodate some of the changes that COVID has brought to my business. And I can move all of my packing and shipping out of my house, which is right now with my husband working at home. When I have to pack orders, we only have one office and we kind of share. So when I have to take like a huge load of orders and pack them, I actually have to move it like out of the office and into the kitchen. And it's just really not working, especially with the holiday season when I just got slammed with orders. Packing like piles and hours was just very distracting to my husband, who has to be on the phone consulting clients, and I'm like ruffling paper packaging like behind, and you hear the tape squeaking.
I was just thinking about like the packaging tape,
yeah,
like the handle thing.
Not just for the quality of life and for his like his office life, but like for me to be able to hire help when things get too crazy during like seasonal help. I needed this past holiday with COVID, all of my orders being moved online and not having a single show, like in-person craft show, was it really changed the way I was working and making that shipping part of my business just significantly more important. So this new space is really going to allow for that transition, since now I have a lot more direct sales, which was a goal of mine for a long time, and honestly a big positive that came out of COVID. So yeah, it'll be really exciting, and I can produce more again, and I can store everything in one place. I can get help. Yeah, it's a new thing for me because I'm very much that person who doesn't like to spend extra money if it's going to cut into profit anywhere. I try and and I'm realizing now as I'm like maturing in business that there are certain things that you just have to spend money on because they will grow your business exponentially. And avoiding them is really only a hindrance, and it's going to keep me spinning my wheels in this position. If it isn't the best solution, then I don't know why sometimes, like for instance, ShipStation. I have been, which is a website integration platform that connects to like my Squarespace, and it will automatically download my orders onto their platform and create shipping labels for me like in 1 second. And it links it through like my FedEx account. It's $10 a month or something. Like, it's very cheap, I know, but I was so stingy that and it probably costs like maybe $1.50 or $2 more per package that you would ship normally. But the convenience factor when you have something like 100 orders in a queue, to be manually typing them into a FedEx shipper, which I was doing just to save that
$11 or whatever.
Yes, whatever was just, it's just not good common sense. So I'm realizing now that there are these things that I just have to invest in, and if they are more practical and if they're going to get me to that next phase of efficiency with systems, or just where I can very smoothly hire somebody and teach them how to use that, where before I couldn't hire somebody and have them come into my husband's office and pack my orders for me. So these little transitions are just it's a needed upgrade, and I'm really excited about them.
So you still get to use the same kiln though?
Exactly. There's a little bit of an inconvenience factor with having to take it to the 4th floor, but we have a huge freight elevator, so it's not.
That's nothing like the one time I tried to take, when we got the wheel that's in our kitchen right now, which is in the dining room, and the community studio was like, you could pick up clay and make stuff at home and then bring it back to be fired. So it wasn't like closed the way it was in COVID, but it wasn't open for it, like you could come and glaze basically. And so I wrapped up leather hard, bone dry pieces and put them in the car, and I don't even live that far from the studio. Normally I walk to the studio, and still, yeah.
That's a delicate procedure there. And then probably lugging like 50-pound boxes of clay up the steps too.
Yep.
That's not easy.
Yep. So we're past that. But It makes sense to me as far as just how hard it is to make a living with pottery. It makes sense to me to wait until, push comes to shove. The pain in some ways is too great to not make that change until it's okay. Like, the pain of losing that $10 a month is less than the pain of typing in 100 shipping labels.
Yeah, absolutely. There's you got to strike a balance, and I think you have to be honest with yourself, because there are certain times when I felt like I was too stubborn, like I didn't want to give in, because I really, especially the first year, where my very first year was just so much a proof of concept. Can I do this? Can I make a living from the things I make? And will this be profitable? So much of that like stubbornness was just me trying to prove like I can be profitable and I will be profitable year after year. And I want to be able to grow. So I think like you have to eventually give up that control over that like one element that you're so fixated on, in order to be honest with yourself that this thing really isn't working. And this is really like the fat that you got to cut in order to free up time or space. I think you have to reach that point of frustration with it, like you're saying, but you also, like, before you get to that point, maybe be a little bit honest about what's to come if you do really continue to be stubborn about this thing.
You mentioned what's to come. It's like preparing to have a bigger business. If you hadn't spent the money to get that ship station, you would be limited in the quantity of work that you could even handle for a certain shop update. Or if you hadn't left our community studio, you wouldn't have been able to grow or have more direct sales or have more of your like store wholesale partnerships, or you were at your max capacity, which wouldn't have maybe sustained for a full-time job.
No, yeah, it absolutely wouldn't. And it's definitely like important to do that crash course. There's sometimes when I look back on my first year and I'm like, what could have been different? What could I have controlled more to make this, to have made like where I am now a little bit easier? And like, when I look back on it, I'm like, I think it's really good that I just hustled my butt off and tried literally everything. I said yes to almost everything. I really dove in. And I sometimes would look back at that and be like, man, if I had more of a plan and was more like more of a system and like just was more methodical in how I approached everything, maybe there wouldn't have been as much like heartache. But that probably would have limited me. I think that I would have possibly missed some opportunities if I was already turning things down in advance, just thinking that I wouldn't enjoy them. Because so much of that first year is just exploring. What do I like to do? Do I like to do commissions? Sometimes. Do I like to do custom orders? Not really. What do I like to make? How do I like to make a living? What kind of shows are successful? What kind of shows aren't successful? How does it work with wholesale clients? Had I been really nitpicky, I feel like I probably also wouldn't have as much confidence because there would still be so much unknown. So I think there is something to be said about the hustle, about just diving in and then getting to that point of, oh my gosh, something has to change.
Yeah.
It's just about once you get there, I think pushing through really smartly, which is not always easy to do or intuitive. And that's a clunky process.
Or maybe one step before you get to complete burnout, realizing that's what's coming.
It's because hustle is, burnout is, you have to avoid it. And the hustle business model is not sustainable at all. It has to die down eventually. But its advantages are that you learn a lot about yourself and then just about how your business should or shouldn't function.
Because in some ways, there's not always a way around it. Like knowing that it is a period of time. Hustle can't be forever, but I currently have no solution to watching all of you go through the holiday sales season this last year. And we had thought we were going to do some, but then with COVID and studio closures and whatever, that just wasn't possible. But watching all of the makers go through the holiday sales season, I don't know how you can't really lessen that much, because it is what it is. And in some ways, in a maker's world, you're a part of the retail world, and that's just what Q4 is.
Yeah. I always say every year, I'm going to be more prepared for the holidays. I'm going to be more prepared. And every year I feel like I am not. And I've moved my holiday production all the way back to June. I start stocking up and our house just becomes this just like crazy, just bins full of products waiting to be sold. And it just never is as smooth as I think it's going to be. And it's always exciting. It's like my favorite time of year. And you look forward to it for the whole year. You look forward to, that's when you make the majority of the money. That's when you meet the majority of your customers. Yeah, there isn't really, I haven't found a good solution. You're just every year tweaking. Somebody told me one time that you'll never feel like you've fully arrived when you own your own business, when you're running a small business. There's always something that's you're scribbling down. This is my next goal. I've got to improve this next year. I've got to figure this one thing out. It's their satisfaction for sure. You reach these moments of like total achievement. But you'll never feel, and I don't know if that makes me really excited or I don't know.
Depends on the day for me.
Yeah.
Because in some ways that's the attraction to me because we are uniquely, you're also not stuck in one position, right? Like you are constantly using your brain to 110% of its function to move forward and to figure out whatever the next thing is. But like we were saying before we hit record, it also means that when your website breaks, you're the IT department, and that really sucks.
Yeah, that's a tough spot to be.
But so what I'm interested in a lot of things, but what I remember from when you were at the studio, but also now that you're full time, you were testing out so many different, you had some wholesale partnerships with Shop. You and Emily were doing the big shows for the first time here in Chicago, like Renegade and things like that. Mm-hmm. And then you have, in some ways, your direct to consumer, your like direct sales were maybe like when I can, I'll throw those in there. But they were bonus, they were extra. So what's that balance of all the things look like now?
Yeah, pre-COVID, it was definitely, I've always had a small amount of wholesale shops. I've always wanted to keep that a smaller portion of I want to do it and I want to have partnerships with brick and mortar shops around. But you can only do so much of that because in order to make a living off of wholesale, you have to produce an amazing amount of volume because you're selling things at such a discount. So that I've liked to keep at maybe a smaller percentage. And then pre-COVID, craft shows were a huge chunk of my business. Just being in Chicago, we have an amazing market for that. Craft shows were my very first taste. Back in 2015, actually, is when I started doing them. My very first one was Renegade Craft Fair, and it was the holiday one, and I got waitlisted actually because at that point I didn't have a website. I made one specifically for the application. I was taking photos on my iPhone like 3 or something, and it was super grainy. And that first show, I made like a good chunk of money, and I was like, oh my God, there's potential. Because when I graduated college in 2009, 2010, there was nothing. I graduated wanting to be an artist, and that world to me was really like, it was very confusing. It seemed like it was really hard to access. The route was either you get an MFA when you graduate art school, or you go and you work with galleries. And it seemed like this really high end, I couldn't break in. I was not there yet. I was not at that level. When the first craft show started showing up around like 2014, 2015, it was like, there's hope. Like for people who don't have this gigantic portfolio of work. Like, yes, I went to art school, but when you graduate, you don't really have like much direction. I didn't have much direction when I graduated at all.
Really helpful.
Yeah, pretty much. That was like this first glimpse into this could be real. This could be potential. So I had done these craft shows part-time. Like it was my side hustle for sure. I've always been a part of some sort of community studio where I was making work and selling it on the side while working full-time. And yeah, they just grew, and I started applying to more and more, and then doing multiple shows of that same, like I would do the Renegade Holiday, the spring one and the summer one. And they were like probably about a good 50 to 60% of my income. And then the direct sales were slim. I really wanted those to be more like direct to my website. That's been the part of the business that I've been like trying to grow for a very long time. Just e-commerce, getting people to type my name correctly and to find me online was tough. Getting those craft fair clients to even keep my business card or the little like postcard little blurb about my business, that was really difficult. Like they would lose it, or they wouldn't remember me, or they'll see me next year and they'll be like, oh yeah, I couldn't find your name, or I lost your card. So COVID has been actually an amazing blessing, because it took all of those customers who would more casually shop me at craft fairs and brought them online. And they were able to engage with all the hard work I put into my branding on my website. There's a lot of little things to click around, so they would connect with me a lot more. They would connect with me in person for sure, but there is something about like when you're busy in a craft show, you feel a little rushed and it can be a little bit brief. And again, they may forget who I am after they go walk to the next booth. So connecting with me and having me online in their in their browser history, they will be able to find me again. Just next time they type Angela V, it'll probably pop up. So that's been great, just to have people come directly there and engage. And honestly, the engagement has been, and the reaction from customers has been significantly better, just because they've been able to engage outside of Instagram and just see the marketing that I've put together on my site.
The shows help promote you guys. Like, how do you feel like you got that show audience to you virtually?
Definitely the shows help. So the directories on the shows, like on their show page, they've got however many hundred of vendors that they have on there, and they always break it down into categories. And those remain up for years after the show. So if somebody went to a craft fair and maybe had my mug or something, or was just generally shopping for ceramics, they can easily find me. And then those shows do their own marketing, which is great. Like occasionally they'll post something of mine or repost it on Instagram, and then you'll get some followers. And then even too, just the hashtags that direct if I'm selling something that I would be selling at Renegade, I'll hashtag the Renegade, and it then becomes cataloged into their thing. So when people are searching for that, I will come up. So that's definitely been amazing marketing. Just paying to be a part of those shows has paid off big time. And I've gotten wholesale accounts from that. I've gotten amazing return customers. I've gotten like custom business from that too. So that's been a huge launching pad for me. It's just gaining an audience through that has been amazing.
That's amazing to hear, because I've always been curious. Like, the only tiptoe into shows I ever even had the chance to do was with one of the festivals in the neighborhood that the community studio had a booth and everybody could like share space, which was a great, I cleared out my inventory, which was great. Now, it wasn't a huge amount of inventory, but it was also, I very quickly recognized like those were just bonus sales for me. For one, it wasn't my full-time income. For two, the studio as a nonprofit was given a booth, so we didn't have to pay the booth fee. I didn't have to design the booth. I couldn't design the booth because you were sharing tables with other people. So the overhead for me to try that was really low. And so the few $100s or whatever I happened to make was great. But then I also got to thinking, if I want to get serious about this, I spent 10, 12 hours that Saturday, like just in the booth, which, since it was the community studio, was fun. We were with other people, and lucky for me that year the weather was nice. But I just can't imagine. I was thinking through, like, how does this actually work if you have the cost of the booth and your time all weekend long and all that kind of stuff? Like, it's hard.
It is hard. So a lot of times it depends on what shows you do, but the margin is still better than wholesale. And some shows are ridiculously expensive, and it is a risk because of the weather. Especially Chicago spring shows they're still 40 degrees and raining. And surprisingly, people still come out to them, but they are not fun. They're super demoralizing when you're freezing cold, standing outside, and there's just not that many people coming by. So they're definitely a risk, but it is such an amazing way to connect with customers and to test products. If you have new things, you could just stick it in the booth and see how people respond to it. I don't do that often, and I haven't done it in a year since there haven't been shows, but that was a great way just to see, do people like this new glaze? And to talk to people about my work. I met a lot of just people responding to the themes behind my work about the Midwest, which has created just like this really cool community of people. So they're definitely worth it to find a quality audience and to put yourself out there. But some shows here in Chicago cost like $700 just to attend. So you are already in the hole, and it's nail biting until you make that money back.
Right.
Yeah.
And let alone, okay, you surpassed 700. Now I actually need to make something to go buy groceries on my way home.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned connecting with people on the themes of your work, and I wanted to be sure to talk about that because I love the way on your website and on your Instagram you pair how you match like the images you're taking on like the hikes that you guys go on and being out in nature. And I remember even from being at our community studio, it always confused me why you were in a major city because every moment you guys had, it was like, get out. But you do such a beautiful job of pairing like what you're seeing in nature to then translating that into a glaze and into your pieces. And do you feel like either just talk to us about that, or do you feel like having that theme and that through line of your work has really, given you a specific niche maybe in the market or wherever you want to go with it, really?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like there was a period of time after I graduated college where I knew I wanted to do ceramics, and I knew, again, that this kind of like breaking into high-end galleries was just intimidating and it wasn't right. So I decided to continue doing it, and I was always like, I signed up for these classes that were just independent studies to continue making work and exploring and working full time. But it was fun. It was a time for me to not have, after just finishing like an intense like thesis show and coming out of art school, it was a time for me just to chill out and enjoy the craft and explore where I wanted it to go. And where it continually landed was I was building this aesthetic that was really sincerely what I was living in Rogers Park that we had an apartment right off the beach. And so like literally you could be in our bedroom and see the lake from our bed. So that was just a huge part of I would wake up, walk out there, take pictures, come home, sit out there and just enjoy the lake. It was my serene escape from the city. And so that was just what eventually became my aesthetic. It translated just very naturally. It wasn't like a choice that I made. It was just, I would talk about, the only person I was really talking about my work with at that time was my husband. And we would just enjoy nature together, and we would go on hikes out in the prairie. And it was just I don't know how to explain it other than sincere. It was exactly who I was and what I wanted to be doing. It was what I spent my time doing. And I grew up out in the suburbs, like right next to this really big tall grass prairie. So these two aesthetics of the lake and the prairie, these wide open spaces that are often misperceived. I feel like the Midwest sometimes gets this bad rap with nature.
The weather sucks. Come on.
I love winter. I go on many winter hikes. But
you're the only person who like makes me want to go near the lake in the winter.
It's gorgeous.
It's like only when I see you post, I go, I could maybe consider being completely whiplashed by wind to be able to go look at the lake right now because that looks amazing.
Yeah, it's thrilling. It's totally different than like the Midwestern nature scene. I feel like is definitely underestimated. Like people, when they think about nature, they always think about this like really grandiose, the seaside cliffs or these like gorgeous beaches or these mountains or these deserts. And I feel like a lot of times people don't know or don't at least appreciate the valuable resource of the Great Lakes that is just an amazing thing that we utilize that we live right next to it. And then the amount of species that is sustained by even the dwindling prairie reserves that we have in our state. I'm a little bit of an advocate for it, but I definitely want to be a part of that conversation on climate change and want to be a part of that conversation about how do we as modern folk bond with the natural world around us these days. And like I said, like when we talk about climate change and how to be good stewards of our little patch of, even the little patch of grass that's outside my apartment, it's very small. It's probably like 10 feet. Like, how do I take care of it? And how do I enjoy it and appreciate it? People often think of climate change as just affecting the oceans or the wildfires. Yeah, just these extreme things. But we have something like 500 plus, migrating species of birds that come through the Chicagoland area. And that's like pretty amazing. And there's ways to think about that in just like this hyper local way. And sometimes that just comes with falling in love with the place where you live and bonding with it in this kind of unique way. So if I could be at all a part of helping people remember what's beautiful about the Midwest, the prairies, the lakes, and what I find people bonding with my work is like, these are a part of other people's identities and not just mine. Yeah, I grew up here, but so many people have these amazing memories of hanging out at the beach, going on really cool hikes. I had a customer the other day who reached out to me and said that she wanted to buy a set of mugs for her boyfriend because he was moving away. He was moving overseas for school, and they spent this past winter going on hikes near the lake. And so she wanted to give him some of my frozen lake mugs to memorialize that sweet time that they had together by the beach. So those kind of interactions are like, that just makes me the happiest potter in the world, to see somebody treasure a landscape and have a really sweet memory surrounding it. Because when that happens, when people connect with their landscapes, they want to care for it. So if I could, that's the impetus. It's very, I don't know, it's just, I love the Midwest. I love where I grew up. I love living here. And I want as many people as possible to fall in love with it too. So
I had the thought as you were talking, it seems to me that the people I see having the most success with selling their work, commercially the most success, are also the people who have this deeper meaning and ethos and value system behind the work. It's not just, I'm making pots because playing with mud is fun, which it is, but it's also your work stands for something else, whether that be standing for the tradition, not a tradition, but what's the word I'm looking for? Like a habit.
Ritual?
Yes, thank you, a ritual. Like I'm thinking of Sandy's work, who was my instructor in Italy, who does all of the different beautiful traditional Japanese tea ceremonies. And you and I both drink a lot of tea. If we were to make the act of making tea every morning a ritual, then that takes on a different meaning rather than just grabbing whatever Target mug out of your cabinet and throwing it in and getting out the door kind of thing. Standing for climate change and reminding someone of a consciousness about where they live, now all of a sudden that's not just a teapot, that is something else, and that seems to really strengthen your brand, not only as an aesthetic, but also just as I don't know what the word is. I'm using my hands a lot and nobody can see it.
Yeah, it's just interesting to see. And in people I don't have only customers who are from the Midwest. I get people from the East Coast who enjoy it just because it's a design that they like winter or something like that. And it's not even just about the themes behind it. I think that's definitely like that extra level that people can connect with. But I'm very much interested in just making things that are as beautiful as I can make them and as useful as I can make them. And I want people to enjoy them. And one facet of that is definitely connecting with me and my Midwestern fanaticism. That's one aspect for sure. And then another part of it too is the giving back. I started building these collections. So early on, when I was in that like hustle phase, I was very scattered because I was trying everything. And then the second year, I was like, okay, Ange, you really need to focus. And I realized that the things that people were really responding to was the branding part of it. But that connection wasn't super clear. So I wanted to like really drill that in. Honestly, what helped me identify it, A, and then communicate it, B, was I did a lot of writing and just workshopping ideas with certain people. My brother-in-law does these all design sprints. It's just like concept building and idea, like storyboarding, and doing my best to tell that story through the branding. So through the storyboarding, we discovered it was really apparent, but just how I needed to really thread that needle for people and make it really clear that this was it's not just this is my inspiration, but it's directly inspired by these specific landscapes that I'll take a picture of a snowy prairie, and then I have a mug whose glaze looks like really similar to it, the glaze combo. And then when you buy that mug, if it's in this certain collection, so I wanted to build these collections that were based on these themes of the prairie and the Great Lakes. And they were grouped mostly by their colors and by their glazes that mimicked these. But those specific landscapes had certain charities where a percentage of the sales was donated to, like Open Lands is one of them for the northeastern Illinois. They take care of all the parks. They do a lot of restoration. And then the Great Lakes, just restoring the Great Lakes from invasive species and then promoting clean drinking water, basically. Just protect any sort of protections for these landscapes. So that was a really cool thing to have customers who are connecting with it and then intentionally buying it in order to continue to give back to those places that they really cherish and that are really precious to them and to other people as well.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. And this is one of those moments where I don't have a segue. Oh, I know what I was thinking of. The other piece I wanted to circle back to, and this is just a total aside and not connected with what we were just talking about, but when you mentioned going to art school and feeling like there were these two routes of you either spend all the money to get an MFA or you go to try and get in galleries. And as soon as you said galleries, the immediate thing I had thought about that I wanted to circle back to was it left no room for the functional. Like when I think, not that there can be functional work in galleries, but when I think about the work that does get put into the galleries, the point is to set it up here and look at it. Like the point isn't it to have it in your kitchen cupboard and pull it down every day and make your morning cup of tea a ritual.
Yeah. Totally. There are some for sure, like I've looked into it. There are some that will they have a whole mug collection. But the impression that I got right when and it could just be like an intimidation thing. It just seemed so out of my league and so other from, I think in college, I really struggled with where does ceramics fit into this like fine art world? And I feel like this is a really hot topic. Like tons of people have struggled with this and grappled with it and have come to terms with it in different ways. But definitely when I started freshman year, I came in knowing I was going to do ceramics. I came in with AP art credits from high school. I came into ceramics 101 or whatever it is freshman year and talked to my professor, had this big plan. And then slowly as I started to take like art history classes and modern art classes and go deeper, there was this like, not embarrassment, but it just didn't feel like ceramics was up to snuff. There was a big growing movement of this like conceptual side of art. So much so that I, for sophomore and junior year, abandoned ceramics completely and started making like these really conceptual videos and these big installation sculptures. And actually the turning point was when I went to we had to do a proposal for our senior like thesis show. And junior year, I proposed this idea and I was not in ceramics at all. I was doing these videos and I was making these like little machines that were like basically like kinetic sculptures where you like twist something and it moves a whole series of cogs. And anyways, I had this whole like conceptual stuff that I was learning in sociology books about simulation, simulacra, and everything is so hyper symbolized, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, I presented it to this panel of 6 professors and it did not go well. Like they could very well see that I was just jamming this conceptual stuff into this object. And I did it really mostly because I thought it was like more high art and I was like really believed in that conceptual part of it. And one professor, he was my painting professor. I didn't take painting, but he said, Angela, it's about what you make. It's about the object. And I was like, duh. Like it really struck me. It like really made me feel like, oh, he's right. Like I had nothing to defend myself with after that. I was like, of course it is. Of course it's about what I make. And that was really my turning point back to the object. And I realized that this kind of hyper conceptualized art world just was not for me. And not just because I wasn't very successful, but because I was much more attracted to the kind of the simplicity and utility, and much more attracted to just the simple, like something can just be beautiful for what it is. And it doesn't have to have all this conceptual stuff piled on behind it. And if it does sincerely come out, like in the case of the Midwestern themes that are coming behind my work, that's unavoidable, but that's just my point of view. It's not really me trying to say this mega grandiose thing. So yeah, when I graduated, I had this idea that this functional, simple stuff doesn't really fit in with this high-minded gallery stuff. And there was no gig economy back then. You weren't taking your phone to a market and selling your pieces. Like, that hadn't happened yet. The craft fairs weren't really, they weren't craft fairs. They were these fine art fairs that you had to pay thousands of dollars for a booth, and you were selling your stuff for thousands of dollars. So that shift at, like I said, that first Renegade that I did, where I was able to actually make money off of what I did, I was like, oh my God, there's a market and there's potential. This will work out. It was very hard to imagine this, like these simple functional objects in a gallery. I can see it now, and I see people do it all the time, but I think perspective was really intimidating at the time.
Yeah. That's similar to what I remember the handful of photography classes I took at DePaul for my undergrad, and everybody was always trying to push the envelope, do something edgy, do something like, it was almost like there had to be this shock value to things. And I was just like, I don't need a shock value. Like, real life, there's enough going on in real life. Like, why can't I just make something that looks great, but is solid? And in so many ways, I imagine that's how I came into wedding photography, because it was the space where I went, you're rewarded for consistently producing something beautiful, pure. If all I do is take the most beautiful portrait of your grandma, because that's like and that's the family heirloom, I'm happy. I'm good. Yeah. And everybody else is happy too. I didn't need to do something that was like, there's stories, I won't dive down the stories of what I'm thinking of, the ways in which you had people who like clearly had perfectly like safe, privileged lives who were trying to push this like edgy, emotionally distraught, whatever. And I'm like, you grew up in Palatine. You're fine.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny what you like, and art school definitely has an influence over this for sure, but it's funny what you perceive as precious and beautiful at those different times of life. I had a totally different idea of what was good art or good work or good, like what I even judged it on. The criteria was completely different. And I just now absolutely value the simplicity in ceramics. And one thing that's really freeing, I think, is that it is so much about the material. When you're looking at it, you're looking at the glaze and the properties of the glaze that just make it so vibrant and stunning, or the way that it dripped really beautifully, or the shape or the weight of it. It's so much about the object, which is what that professor told me and has stuck with me so heavy since. And you don't look at a painting and think, oh, wow, those are really nice globs of paint. But you do look at a cup and that's a really beautiful glaze. So it is so much about the material. And I think that there's something so freeing in just letting that be the driving force of the beauty. Like, you don't have to do this big, mysterious, grandiose, hyper-conceptual thing. It's just your point of view comes through in how the colors you choose and the shapes that you make. And it's really important for potters to remain sincere in those choices. But I don't think you have to do these amazingly remarkable, innovative, edgy things in order for it to be beautiful or good.
Yeah. Absolutely. We could beat a dead horse on this subject for a while, so I'm going to force myself to move. Being conscious of your time and the time you've given up on making to talk about this, and coming full circle, since you've gone through all these transitions, you've been full-time for coming up on 3 years. Well, I know we already touched upon, you can't really go backwards and say, oh, I should have done this differently and this would have been better. But is there anything that you feel like you've learned now that has made this work?
Yeah, I would say like probably two things, and they're a little bit different. So the first would definitely be time management. As a small business owner, it's very complicated, and it's really important to strike that balance. And this kind of goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning of carving out that time for those intentional conversations with yourself about what are these little like transitions that I need to make that will make it run smoother, allow me to grow. Where are these transition points going to be? And then just to have time to continually experiment. That's like really important. That's one thing I find really hard is you get to a point and you get into a flow of making and filling orders and doing shop updates that sometimes it's really hard to stray from that. And I think in order to grow, you always have to have on your agenda new projects and a couple experiments per month. And whether that be like, I'm not very like structured or scheduled, so I can't do every Friday before lunch, I do an experiment. I'm just like, whenever I feel like it, I'll do it. But as long as you're doing it, I think is really important. So time management and making sure that part of that is future planning always and experimenting. And then the other part, I think, is I think a lot of the conceptual kind of sincerity stuff will just come naturally to people. I think sometimes people try to have a point of view right away and try and speak that into it. I think that sometimes people should just dive in technically. And I think a lot of times, and not over focus on it, but like really trying to make the most perfect cylinder. Like that's important. But I think trying to find like your flow and your style, and then to try and really understand deeply the material so that you can do your best with it. When you do want to like really dive in and utilize it, that you have the skills to do it, to express your point of view, or to use that glaze to its fullest, and to constantly be learning technically. That's one thing I think going to a liberal arts college and then in art school, so much of what I learned was about like developing that conceptual side of art and talking about art and critiquing art. And it wasn't so much focusing on the technical side of things. And now that I'm 3 years in, there are some technical hurdles that I've reached just with glaze chemistry, even just like understanding reactivity inside the kiln, what's going on there, how to fix flaws. Those little things will trip you up really bad, and you're accountable and responsible for them to your customers, and they cost you money. So being able to invest energy and enthusiasm for the technical side of the craft as well as, because that creative part will just come naturally.
Yeah, I think the thing that I have learned in this, what will be a great pause from COVID, is like you can't rush the creative part. I'm still thinking about the conversations we had when I was on that sabbatical and only focusing on ceramics for the first time ever for 3 months, and digging deeper and really carving into, this is what I love, this is what it's all about. And those conversations started a year ago, and they're still popping up in my head going, this is it for me. Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time. I'm glad we got set up.
Yes,
for the sake of everybody else, it was really just my selfish, hey, I want to hear how you are.
No, it was super fun, Rebecca. Thank you so much. This is awesome.
I will link your Instagram to the show notes so that nobody has to worry about spelling your name. But
thank you.
So that'll just be there. We're just not even going to spell it aloud on air. Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
That wraps up episode 122 of the Maker's Playbook. If you enjoyed this episode, we would love it if you snapped a screenshot and shared about it on your social media channel of choice. Tag me at the Maker's Playbook on Instagram, as well as Angela, so we can send over our thanks. Angela is on Instagram at Angela Venarchik Ceramics, but the link to her IG handle, so you don't have to worry about spelling her tricky last name, can be found in our full show notes. Which, if you've been wondering, what are these show notes you speak of? Where are they located? All of them can be found in full at our website, makers-playbook.com/podcast. Last week, we closed the doors for a very full class of the Makers Photography Styling System, which you heard about during our Photography Extravaganza series here on the podcast. But if you've just found us on the internet, You can still get free monthly photography tips by snagging my at-home photography cheat sheet. The link for this free PDF download can also, you guessed it, be found in the show notes, as well as in the detailed text of whatever podcast app you're listening to. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have makers you'd love to hear on the podcast or business questions you really wish you could discuss, by all means, send me a DM on Instagram or an email to rebecca@makers-playbook.com and we'll queue up an episode. In the meantime, go get back to making your dreams a reality, because together, we've got this.